What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling deck that I'm feeling so happy that I'm actually able to say that this deck is finally able to compete again. So today we're taking a look at GISHKI, one of my all-time favorite decks. I just feel like ritual archetypes are so overshadowed at this point that anytime we get anything good related ritual cards, I just feel like we have to cover them in some way. So let's talk about one of the oldest decks that basically was one of the first ritual archetypes that was ever meta. So if you remember how this deck functioned in the day, which I'm sure most of you don't because most people are fairly new players, or at least they were not in the game so much back then, but this deck was kind of like a hand loop deck, and I'm so glad that the deck is not like that anymore because I'm sure nobody really cares so much when a deck is like a hand loop deck. They feel like it's a deck that is not consistent, it's something that is more like a cheese, but fortunately the deck is nothing like that. So the deck has new cards with Photon Hypernova that can bring out really good disruptions. It has really good synergy with Sprite, which is one of the best engines you can use if your deck calls for it, and also it's super consistent. So we're going to see exactly what the deck can do post Photon Hypernova and why it's so good. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So let's start with a ritual monster first. We only have one ritual monster, which is kind of like a new thing for this deck. We would usually run a lot of ritual monsters, but now we only have 2 copies of GISHKI Era. So this card is a card that of course you can summon with any GISHKI ritual. If it's ritual summoned, you can target a water monster in your graveyard, you special summon it. It cannot be destroyed by battle with a monster special summoned by the extra deck, and the important part is that once per turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect, as a quick effect, you can return a GISHKI ritual monster you control to the hand, mainly itself, and if you do, you negate the activation and shuffle that card into the deck. So keep in mind, this is not a hard once per turn effect because it was meant to be kinda, because it returns to the hand. So if you had multiple rituals, yes, you could use this effect more than once, but you can still use the effect more than once, even if this card is the only ritual monster you have on the field, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So this card is the main body you want to be summoning as quickly as possible. It's a card that is going to be attacking for 3k, it's the card that is going to be disrupting your opponent, and it's going to give you more resources back from the graveyard. So yeah, this card is everything you can ask for a boss monster, for a deck, and it's very searchable, it's very easily summonable, and it's an amazing card overall. We have 3 copies of GISHKI Grim. This card is the Deep Sea Diva of the deck. It's also a new card, so when this card is summoned, you can summon a GISHKI monster from the deck. It locks you into attacking with pretty much only ritual monsters, but it doesn't matter too much because again, you have a 3k ritual monster that can attack, and also it can be used as a full ritual tribute for any ritual monster. So this card gets you basically the old normal summon of the deck, which fortunately it was not just for a normal summon, thank god, otherwise it would not have been really good compared to what GISHKI Abyss was able to do. And the fact that all of these monsters that I'm going to show you are level 2 monsters means that you can very easily go into a card like Gigantic Sprite, and you can see where this is going. You can use the Sprite engine very consistently in the deck, having too many level 2 monsters you can use to summon all your sprites from the hand and go into the good rank 2 monsters from the extra deck. We have 2 copies of GISHKI Abyss. This is a card that you're going to be summoning off your GISHKI Grim. It's a card that on summon you can add a GISHKI monster with 1000 or less defense from your deck to your hand, so this card can add the searchers. Yes, there are searchers for the searchers. So yeah, this card is the card that you're going to be tutoring out from the deck basically every single time. It gives you a search and a rank 2 on top of it because you summon it most of the time with GISHKI Grim, so it's a really good card. Now, speaking of the targets that you're going to be searching with your GISHKI Abyss, first we have 2 copies of GISHKI Vision. It's a card that can be used as full ritual tribute for any ritual water monster, and you can discard it from your hand to add a GISHKI ritual monster from your deck to your hand. And we have 2 copies of GISHKI Shadow. It can be used again as a full tribute and can also search you a GISHKI ritual spell when you pitch it from the hand. So these cards, playing as 2/2 is not really that big of a problem because again, there are searchers for the searchers, so it's not like you really have to max them out. They can kind of get bricky sometimes. Yes, they're not once per turn, but you don't have too many targets now. It's not like you're playing 3 or 4 different ritual monsters like you used to, so you only have 1 target for basically your GISHKI Vision, and you have like 2 targets for your GISHKI Shadow, but we'll talk about that later. So yeah, these guys being at 2 both, they work really well. Now for the Sprite engine, let's start of course with the most important card. We have 3 copies of Sprite Bloom. This card, I feel like it's self-explanatory at this point. Everyone knows what this card does. You summon for free when you have a level 2, rank 2, or link 2. You special summon one of your monsters, you get your searches, you get pretty much everything you need. We play 2 copies of Sprite Jet. Now, the reason this card is at 2, it's because I wanted to make room for some hand traps while also keeping the deck at 40. If you want to cut anything else for a 3rd copy of Sprite Jet, that's totally fine. I just feel like it's not completely necessary to play this card at 3, but again, playing it at 3, completely broken, because this card is a card that searches you your Sprite starter, which is going to get you another monster, so you can definitely play this card at 3 if you want to. I just don't find finding too much necessary, because of course you can always search your Sprite Jet with cards like Sprite Blue, or summon it from the deck with your Gigantic Sprite. We have one copy of Sprite Red, and of course one copy of Sprite Carrot. You kind of have to play these guys. They're the cards that are going to be used as negates during your opponent's turn, or maybe during your own turn if your opponent is trying to hand trap you. So yeah, these cards are one-offs. They're very easily searchable, and they're really great cards. We have 3 copies of Swap Frog. Now this card kind of goes in pretty much everything that has Sprite in it, but in this particular deck it's actually better than in anything else because you have too many water monsters to discard for its effect. So it's kind of like an extender that is very consistent in this deck because of all the water monsters you have. And even though we did lose Sprite Elf in the ban list, there is a new Link monster, not new, but there is a card that people are playing now as a Link 2 that kind of replaces Elf. It's a card that allows you to get totally awesome on the field, kind of like pretty much the same as it did with Elf. So it's not like we cannot use Toad anymore because we don't have Sprite Elf. There are replacements, and this card in this particular archetype, it's really good to even draw, again because you have so many water monsters to discard to special summon it from the hand. For the hand traps, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Now I'm so grateful that we can finally play hand traps that are not graveyard related. We don't have to play Bestials in pretty much anything deck, in any deck that we're building. We don't have to play cards like Crow, Bell, Skullmeister. We can play actually generic hand traps now that can be used against pretty much anything. And because Castira is a deck that can't get hit by those generic hand traps, and it's going to be the best deck of the new format, we can play cards like this again. So Ash Blossom, again, obviously the most generic hand trap in the game, and now we can use it again. And we also have 2 copies of Imperm. I was debating whether I wanted to play Imperm or Nib, because Nib is really good against Castira, but I just feel like, again, I wanted to play the more generic cards in the main deck and side accordingly until we see exactly how broken Castira is. People are saying it's going to be tier 0. It might be true. I just don't feel like it's going to be nearly as broken as Isisu tier was last format, so maybe it's not going to be as bad, but only time will tell. But again, these 5 hand traps, you can switch them with any hand trap you like. If you feel like you're playing in a format where everyone is playing Castira, you can just go all out and main deck 3 copies of Nibiru, or even cards like Book of Eclipse and Swords of Concealing Light if there are so many Castiras players there, so you can counter them specifically. Now, moving on to the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Aqua Mirror Focalization. Now, this is a card that it adds you a Gishki monster on activation, and it has a really important effect that during the end phase, if you control a water ritual monster, you banish it, and you can set an Aqua Mirror spell and trap card from your deck or graveyard onto the field. So, the cool thing about this card is it's one of the few cards that don't interact with the specifically Aqua Mirror ritual spells, which is something that the deck really needed. It has some good trap cards, but the problem was they were not searchable, so that you could not really get access to them very quickly unless you were hard drawing them, but then you would have to play more than one, which was going to break you a lot of your hands. So this card gives you access to a searcher and also gives you access to a powerful trap card we are going to talk about a little bit later that gives you basically more interaction on its own, and you can use both effects on the same turn, which is really, really good. So this is a huge piece of support. All the cards that we got in Hypernova make the deck a completely different deck from what it used to be, and I'm so happy that the deck is as good as it is with all those new cards. We have one of the old school cards. We have 1 copy of Gishki Aqua Mirror. This is the card that pretty much everyone was playing back in the day too, to ritual summon their monsters. Of course, it can be used to ritual summon Gishki rituals, and you can basically shuffle this card into the deck to target a Gishki ritual monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand, so it can be used to recycle your dead ritual monsters. So that's why playing only 2 copies of the ritual monster isn't too bad, because even if you lose both copies, you can always get one back with your Aqua Mirror. We have 1 copy of Gishki Photo Mirror. The reason we're playing Gishki Photo Mirror is so we can have more ways to get more monsters on the board, so we can get more searchers and we can get both ritual monsters, because again, Grim locks you into attacking with only ritual monsters, so if you want to pressure, you want to be able to get both of your ritual monsters on the board. And this card is again a ritual for your Gishki rituals, and you have to pay life points equal to the ritual monster's level times 500 when it resolves. So yeah, it's another card that basically a pretty basic ritual spell, but again, you want to be able to get both of your monsters on the field, not only because they're both negates, but also to be able to pressure. We have 3 copies of Sprite Starter, pretty self-explanatory. Again, it's a card that is going to give you access to any one of your sprites, triggering its effect. It's a quick play, so you can use it during your own turn and during your opponent's turn if you have multiple copies, or if you search a second copy, so you can summon Carrot and Red during your opponent's turn to get more interruption. We have 1 copy of Sprite Smashers. Even though we don't have to basically play this card completely as an out to Mystic Mine anymore or something like that, it's still a really good card to play because it's a searchable card that is a spot removal, so it's a quick play too, so it's a disruption. So I don't feel like a reason not to play this card, even though it's not something that is absolutely mandatory, otherwise you're going to lose to something like Misty Mine. We have 3 copies of Poto Prosperity. This card makes the deck even more consistent, but again, if you don't have access to this card, you don't really feel forced to play a card like this. You can maybe play like a 3rd copy of Vision or Shadow, or even a 3rd copy of Abyss if you feel like you can afford to run more normal summons and you're breaking on them. So it's not like this deck absolutely needs a card like this. I just find it that if you have access to it, it makes the deck so good. The consistency of the deck is off the roof. It's pretty much impossible to break with a deck like this, because even if you have a hand full of sprites or a hand full of Gishkis, you can still get access to the other one and always have access to sprites because of Gigantic Sprite, even if you see only Gishkis in your hand. So Prosperity gives you the one you're lacking and can also give you a card like a Hand Trap if you have other disruptions, or maybe like a Smashers if you're trying to outsum. We have one copy of Call by the Grave, which is another card that is going to see a resurgence. Basically, everyone was cutting Call by the Grave because, again, it could not interact with Bestials. They were not going in the graveyard, but now that Bestials are not going to be nearly as popular as they used to be, we can use this card again to play around hand traps like Ash Blossom, which a lot of people are going to be playing again. And for the last card in the deck, we have one copy of Aqua Mirror Illusion. Now, this is the card I was mentioning why Focalization is a card that makes this card playable, because Aqua Mirror Illusion is a really powerful card, but again, it was never searchable, so it's not like you could use this card consistently. So what this card does is that you can basically, it's a very simple effect, you special summon a Gishki monster, a ritual monster from your hand, it cannot attack, and it returns to the hand during the end phase. So what this card does for the deck is basically means that your ritual monster, when you have just one copy on the field, it basically means you have two, because once you return to the hand to negate something, you can use this card to summon it again, and you don't really care that it's going to return to the hand during the end phase, because you are going to use its effect again to negate something else, to return it to the hand on its own. So this card is a free negate in pretty much any term of the word, when you can set it to the field with Focalization very quickly and give you access to basically a second copy of your ritual monster. And if you have two of them on the field, it's like you're having three. So you can negate three cards on top of basically your hand traps, your carrots, your reds, so you have a lot of disruptions. Now, moving on to the extra deck, we have, of course, two copies of Gigantic Sprite. This card is really powerful regardless. With or without Elf, this card is amazing, not only because it gets you access to pretty much any one of your level 2 monsters, but because it plays around Nibiru, and Nibiru is going to be a card you're going to see a lot down the road in this format because it's really good against Kashtira, so being able to counter Nibiru, especially in a deck that spams so many monsters like this one, is going to be really crucial. We have one copy of Totally Awesome. I'm going to show you how this card is still summonable very easily, even without Elf, when we get to the Link monsters, so keep in mind this card is not going anywhere. You can still summon this card very easily, not just in this deck, but in any deck that can play sprites. We have one copy of Wannabe Maru. This card is a card that can be used as basically your spot removal going second. You have a lot of utility with your rank 2 monsters, especially with the one I'm going to show you next, but again, this card is really good going second. We have one copy of Herald of Pure Light. This card is a card that allows you to basically add any monster from your graveyard into your hand, and then you have to shuffle a card from your hand into the deck, so you can recycle cards like Ash Blossom with this card. You can recycle anything you have in the graveyard while shuffling a card you don't really need back, so it's a really good card for the grind game. We have one copy of Sky Cavalry Centauria. You know this card was coming in any type of deck that plays rank 2s. This card is so good because it's a card that you can ram into anything without having to detach a material, without getting destroyed, and then during the second main phase you go into your Downer Magician and of course into your one copy of your Sky Thunder Zeus with 4 materials, being able to clear the board twice. Now moving on to the Link monsters. First is the card that I was mentioning that can get you access to Toad very quickly, and that is Bujinki Ahashima. Now this card is the replacement of Elf, kinda. So what this card does is that you can summon a monster from your graveyard and one from your hand with the same level, their effects are negated, and you overlay into them immediately. So you see where this is going basically. Once you have your Swap Frog on the field and you send the second one to the graveyard, Swap Frog can use its effect to return itself to the hand. So then you can link into this card with any other 2 monsters, and then summon the frog you send to the grave, summon the frog you return to the hand, and boom, you have Totally Awesome on the field again. So it's very easy to summon Toad, even if Elf is banned now that we don't have access to it anymore. Again, there are so many good Link 2 monsters like this one that we can replace it with to make sure that we get access to one of the best negates in the game. We have one copy of Coral Anemone. This card in a water deck, it's pretty staple, especially in a deck that uses so many Link 2 monsters, because it's a card that you can still use, and then before you use its effect and lock yourself into water monsters, you can use your sprites to get more extenders, and you can do all that other stuff. And because we are playing a water deck, this card doesn't really lock us, because after we use its effect to revive something like an Abyss, which will give us another search, then we can go into our Link monsters and try to push. We play one copy of Dark because we do have some Dark monsters with the inclusion of the sprites, of course, so we can use this card still. It's not going to be nearly as powerful as it used to be, because Isizu tier had some really good targets for a card like this, but again, Dark Attribute is so generic that even though we are not in a tier 0 format full of Dark Attributes in our opponent's graveyard anymore, there are still going to be so many scenarios that we're going to steal monsters from our opponent's graveyard with this card. We play one copy of Masquerena. We mainly play this card to go into Avramax, because some decks still cannot play around Avramax when it's summoned by Masquerena, but of course you can also use this card to go into the one copy of Nightmare Unicorn right here to get a spot removal during your opponent's turn. But again, the main reason for Masquerena being in the extra deck is because we have the one copy of Mech Knight Crusader Avramax here as well, so we can use this card against some certain decks that do not have a single out to a card like this. And we also have one copy of Access Code Talker because the deck does spam a lot of monsters even without locking itself with the Sprite effects, so you can get a lot of monsters on the board and then use this card to clear your opponent's board and push for game like. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I'm so glad that Gishki are a playable deck again, and I know that a lot of people that are like old school players like me, they hold dear memories with a lot of those older archetypes, especially the Hidden Arsenal archetypes, so I'm sure they're going to give this deck a try. So if you're a fan of the deck, then you can definitely pick it up. It's going to be one of the best decks to play in the following format. It's not going to be nothing like a Astera, of course, but again, it's a deck that can do a lot, and with the new cards that we got in Photon Hypernova, the deck is basically rejuvenated. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.